Thanks, delegates, for your responses to that poll. It's now time for our EnergyTech Hub, powered by Startup Bootcamp session on the impact of startups. In part one of this session, Trevor Townsend, CEO at Startup Bootcamp, will outline some guidelines for utilities who wish to assess and work with startups. He will also talk with Jody Hallam, General Manager Energy Services at Mondo, about the role startups and scale-ups could play in the future to build new business opportunities. In part two, Mike Harris, Head of Aviation, Defence and Key Verticals at Australian startup Lex Technologies, will share the organisation's experiences and work with various corporations, including in the wind farm space. Karen Buckman, Innovation Opportunity Specialist at Energy Australia, will share the energy retailers' views and experience of working with startups through accelerator and proof of concept initiatives. This session will be hosted by Abs Bulbulia, Energy Program Director at Startup Bootcamp. I'll now hand over to Ab.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Abs Bulbulia, the Energy Program Director at Startup Bootcamp. Welcome, everyone. This session is all about the impact of startups and scale-ups, and is brought to you by the EnergyTech Hub. So the EnergyTech Hub is a collaboration platform that connects international market-ready scale-up technology solutions with Australia's energy industry. The EnergyTech Hub is a member-driven platform with members including Energy Australia, the Clean Energy Finance Council, C4Net, Victorian Clean Tech Fund, and the Victorian Government. Shortly, you'll be hearing from Karen Buckman and Mike Harris on working with startups. But before we get into that, part one is all about assessing startups to create business opportunities with Startup Bootcamp CEO Trevor Townsend and Jody Hallam, the GM of Energy Services at Mondo. So I'd love to hand over to Trevor Townsend to kind of take this conversation forward with Jody. Over to you, Trevor. Can hear you.
Yeah, hi. Welcome everybody to our session on assessing startups and working with startups. And really thrilled to be here on the Digital Utilities Conference and sharing this discussion with Jody Hallam. Jody, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I have a little bit of a delay on my line, so maybe I'm going to pause as I go along. I'm down in Tasmania at the moment. It's very, very cold today, so maybe that's affecting the internet speed down here, yeah?
That's okay. I can hear you loud and clear. Oh. Hopefully everybody else can as well.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So Jody, could you just start by giving us just a little bit of a quick background of your role and at Mondo, just to kind of set the scene and get us on our way?
Yeah, so Mondo is the commercial arm of AusNet Services, a distribution utility here in Victoria, and my role of Energy Services is to really build an energy services business that captures the disruption that's happening in the decentralised energy space, really looking at how we can add value to customers, to networks, businesses, and really innovate around what it means for a future where customers contribute to the overall management of the energy system through their behind-the-meter storage assets and behind-the-meter solutions.
Oh, cool. So just to sort of let everybody know where Startup Bootcamp fits into the energy sector, we've been running accelerator programs in Australia since 2018 in the energy sector. And through that process, we get to talk to thousands of startups each year and get to assess them and meet the founders, really look at what they're trying to achieve, what niches they're trying to go into. And what I'm going to do with Jody today is set the scene a little bit about the why question first, and then move into kind of the topic of innovation and why that matters, and then deeper down into working with startups and how we engage with startups along the way. So one of the things I'd like to start with is really just to probably look over the shoulder, Jody, is saying, well, you know, what have been the kind of defining or major disruptive factors for the utility business over the last few years? Yeah. What do you see have happened? What's happened over the last few years that really changed things around, do you think?
I think if I look at it from a transmission level first and then a distribution level, from a transmission level, we've had a lot of closures of coal-fired generation. We've had rising energy costs. We've had commitments for sustainability targets, and that's really driven a transition to large grid-scale renewables, be it large solar, wind, or very big battery projects. Apologies for that.
Energy efficient.
At a distribution level, it'll probably happen again too. At a distribution level, it's really around the changing preference of customers wanting to be more energy self-reliant. There's a consumer expectation for businesses now to contribute to a more sustainable future, not just consumers' expectation on the business, but an expectation that that business whole supply chain has a contribution to sustainability. Communities wanting to create their own energy ecosystem. And I think that's really driving investment behind the meter. We have more than 2 million customers in Australia today that have invested in their own behind the meter asset, be it solar on a larger scale, and now it's starting to trend more towards storage assets as well. And I think, you know, one of the things from a utility perspective is the traditional network wasn't really built to support what we call bi-directional flow. So, you know, we need to think more differently, more innovative around how we manage the network of the future. And that's where, you know, digital solutions, digital platforms come into play. We've seen an increase of data availability with smart meters, with increased sensing capability across our networks. Customers have more access than they've ever had before around their consumption patterns. So data is playing a significant role in how we'll have to look at what the future holds.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned that people want to be more self-reliant, and just want to dig into that a little bit, because we haven't had a bad energy experience in terms of you know, in terms of reliability and things like that. So what do you think's driving this consumer want or small business want to be self-reliant?
I think it's consistency in terms of cost, so more reliability around their cost structures. I think it's this push to be seen, to be supporting this movement that's happening across the world around carbon abatement. And I also think it's really around communities wanting to create, and I see it more and more, these communities are so sophisticated in their commitment to create what's really a circular economy for their community group, really to create value and keep value within their communities. And we're seeing that more and more here at Mondo. We deal with a lot of sustainability groups, a lot of communities that they really want. When I say energy reliant, it's not energy self-sufficiency, because I think they understand there's still a need for the grid and to be connected to the grid, but they want to take control of their energy future. And we're seeing it more and more, quite strong.
And so where do you think are the biggest opportunities for Mondo in those changes in the coming 3 to 5 years?
So I think when we look at it from a transmission perspective, you know, one of the challenges with the transmission network is it hasn't been able to easily sustain the level of renewable connections. So, you know, mega projects to support the integrated system plan that AEMO have released, and the new renewable energy zones in Victoria that will need large grid scale infrastructure. And from a decentralised market perspective, it's really interesting, and that's a space that I'm really trying to create value for Mondo and our customers. And that's really where, you know, solutions to manage the network in the future can be customer led. They can be led by actively using distributed energy resources, solar and battery behind the meter, to contribute to the overall management of the energy system at a local from a local perspective and from a wholesale market perspective. And Mondo's engaged in a trial. It's called EDGE, and it's a partnership between AEMO, AusNet Services, funded by ARENA. It's really trialling one potential model that could be a two-sided energy marketplace, where customers will use their behind-the-meter solutions to contribute into a marketplace for all different network and wholesale market services. So that's really exciting, and it could be quite game-changing from an industry perspective. And there's many of those type of trials that are happening around Australia. So it's an exciting time to be part of the energy industry.
Yes, certainly. And do you think this shifts the focus in terms of innovation and the way you look at it? Because what you're talking about there is largely business model shifts, isn't it? It's trying to look at, okay, creating value on both sides. Is that where the innovation's going, or is it still largely technical? How do you see, the focus for innovation in Mondo?
Yeah, so I think, innovation will play a significant role in how we capture value for Mondo and all utilities and our customers. And it's really around, how do we innovate around capturing and managing the data if it becomes more of a digital platform solution, customer-led solution? How do we innovate around those digital platforms that can support that type of environment and ecosystem? How do we get closer to the customer, and how do we improve that customer experience through some sort of digital platform, digital experience? How do we innovate around new products and new business models that put the customer in the centre but sharing value between the parties involved? And how do we adapt and innovate our regulatory frameworks and our policies and processes and our market policies and processes to support a future energy market that is two-sided?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk to a lot of startups, a lot of the startups actually really come from this customer-centric point of view, because oftentimes they've felt the pain, the founders, or they've seen the opportunity or seen the frustration in the market. So that's kind of interesting. We see a lot of startups pushing in that area. How do you think startups can benefit, the major corporates like Mondo, in contributing to the new opportunities and your growth?
I think utility businesses are notorious for being quite slow in terms of promoting change within their businesses. We're getting a lot better, but I think I've been around long enough to be able to say that. And I think startups will really help us solve some of our complex problems faster. We're in a completely disrupted industry. We have to solve problems faster, more efficiently, more effectively than ever before. And I think startups play a key role in that. I think their agile methodologies, the tools and the innovation techniques that they use to tackle those problems, we can learn from and utilise. And I also think that startups help push boundaries. They help us think outside the square. They really bring the external in and really help utilities and all businesses really start to think differently about how they tackle some of these problems and really help us capture value.
So when you're assessing startups, when you're selecting startups to work with at Mondo, what do you look for? What kind of criteria do you have? Do you have like a VC funnel? I read a paper recently about selecting startups and using a similar kind of model to a VC, looking at things like technology readiness level, investment readiness level, and then cultural fit. How does Mondo kind of look at that, and how do you sort of go through the process? Because I would imagine you get lots of people coming to you, and you must have a way of kind of bringing those down to a manageable level and knowing which ones to spend your time with and which ones to politely decline.
Yeah, and I think we've learnt over the last few years how to do this a lot better than where we started. It makes me laugh where we started, but Mondo has been engaged in accelerator programs, and they've worked really, really well for us. AusNet Services is part of accelerator programs. Startup Bootcamp is one of those. But, when we really assess hundreds, sometimes at a time, startups as part of these accelerator programs, you know, we're really looking at where are they at with their minimal viable product? You know, are they pilot ready? Can we actually deliver a pilot with the startup to demonstrate the problem that we're trying to solve and a solution? We like them to have some sort of customer base or have tested their product with a customer. One of the things that it sounds funny, but they must be easy to work with. And I think, you know, we've had feedback from a utility perspective that we're not easy to work with as well. But I think there needs to be that mutual understanding that it's a pilot and we're going to work together and learn from each other. We also need to make sure that they've got the resources and they're committed to the delivery of the pilot. Sometimes, you know, we like to run through these pilots quite quickly, and so does a startup. We don't sort of want to engage in a relationship and then find out that the startup's signed up with 4 or 5 other utilities, because they are resource light. So we want to make sure that, you know, they're committed to the pilot and we can deliver a solution.
Yeah, we find a lot, you know, one of our major criteria is we call it coachability. It's really the founders, because of when a startup's early on, they generally haven't found what we call product market fit yet. They don't actually quite know. They've got a good idea, often a solution to a problem, but they don't quite know how to bring that into the market in the right way with the right features and the right pricing and so forth. So we talk a lot about you know, coachability, at that, being able to take feedback and assess it properly. And not all feedback is good feedback, yeah. But being able to work in that collaborative manner would be, you know, is very, very, very important. You made one comment though, that you said that you like to see the startup have some customer traction, and then if every large corporate saying the same thing, it's very hard for a startup to ever get started. Do you ever break that rule if something's very, very interesting or really kind of meets a key criteria?
I think I'm saying that based on the comment of sometimes we're looking at hundreds of startups, and it's a criteria-based assessment. And of course we do, if there's an idea or a minimum viable product that, you know, we're really drawn to, absolutely we would.
Yeah. I suppose the exception, the rules made by the exceptions. But you touched a little bit on it. But what do startups need to learn to do better to interact with large corporates?
One thing that I really focus on, not just from a startup perspective, from a business perspective, is know the problem that we're trying to solve. So understand the problem that the utility has and understand whether your solution or your minimum viable product can accelerate thinking around solving that problem. And I think I like to spend a lot more time understanding the problem and making sure we've got that mutual fit, because then we know we'll actually both get value out of running the pilot or working together. I think the other learnings that I've had from being part of accelerator programs for quite some time is the startup needs to really make sure they're speaking to the right person in the business. Now that may not always be the first person that they meet as part of these accelerator programs. There's decision rights that happen within all businesses. The closer they can get to the business unit, the stronger the value proposition of their solution can be. So I think thinking about strategically who you're talking to and who you need to talk to is really important. And I think be patient with utilities. You know, I think we're learning, we're adapting. Many utilities are now part of accelerator programs and are really harnessing the value that startups can bring, but they're big organisations. They move quite slowly. So sometimes I find startups can get quite frustrated with that. So I think there's a level of patience there as well. Yeah.
So what is Mondo learning to do better when it comes to startup engagement? What are the areas of improvement that you're looking at within Mondo?
So I think one of the first startups that we brought on board here when I was on the AusNet Services side, you know, we tried to provide our standard terms and conditions to the startup, and they just couldn't sign it. The risk distribution in terms of commercials was just something that they couldn't sign on to, and we didn't even think about that. And it was really onerous for us to get that through our legal department and get them to understand that this is a pilot. We're not onboarding a supplier. It's not the same thing. It's an innovation perspective we need to take. The procurement process and the business case process is also similar. You know, we've learned that if it's an innovation pilot, don't run it through your traditional business case model. It doesn't work when you're trying to show an economic return on a pilot that you really don't know what the outcome will be. So, you know, we're still learning that, to be honest. We're still learning how we can fund innovation. We're still learning how we can support business case metrics around how we demonstrate value from innovation. And I think the stronger that we start to understand the benefits of moving away from traditional methods to non-traditional, more innovative methods around that, the more startups that we can engage within our business, the more problems that will solve.
Yeah, I mean, the method that we advocate is what we call innovation accounting, which is, you know, is actually setting up those metrics and you know, the relevant budget and often the cap budget on what you want to spend, and then you're really measuring what you're learning, the number of experiments and then outcomes that move to the next stage. But it's, yeah, if you try to manage it from the CFO's office on return on investment, it's very, very, very difficult. So just let's finish on a really high note, because I love to be, you know, very positive. Let me know. We'll talk about the biggest success that Mondo's had with a startup engagement. Let's finish on a really, really positive on high note.
I could talk about I could talk about sort of 5 to 10 different pilots we've run that have really started to move the dial in terms of how we technically manage our network, how we build digital platforms. But the biggest success for me with working with startups is changing the mindset of our organisation, creating an innovation imperative within our organisation, opening up our organisation to work with external partners. We don't have to solve all the problems ourselves. There's people out there innovative and creating really smart things quicker and faster than what we could ever imagine. Let's harness that and let's bring that in and work with them. And I think that is what we've learned. And I think that is the greatest success for Mondo.
Yeah, so mindset change, which is really, really powerful, isn't it? Because then you're harnessing the whole organisation to move towards the strategic goals. Jody, hey, thanks very much for chatting with me today. Really insightful comments, and you know, we love working with you, obviously, and so thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, and I'll hand back to Abs.
Thank you, Jody and Trevor. Some great insights on assessing startups and also on Mondo's experience with innovation and startups as well. I think changing mindsets, as you mentioned, is like super, super powerful. So we're going to head off to the next session, which is working with startups with Karen Beckman, the Innovation Opportunity Specialist at Energy Australia, and Mike Harris, Head of Aviation, Defence and Key Verticals at the Australian startup Lex Technologies. Before we get Karen up to go through her presentation, we'd love your audience questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. So please post those questions. We'd love to answer those. So I'd like to welcome Karen up and give yourself an introduction, and we'll kick off with your presentation.
No drama. Thank you, Abs. And I'll just kick it up. So before I share the screen, so Abs has said, I am Karen Buckman. I work in the innovation team at Energy Australia. So I've been at Energy Australia since 2012. So worked in strategy, then went across to the innovation team. So I'll pull up my presentation. Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of working with Startup Bootcamp. It's the 4th year now. So it's been a great journey so far. Okay. Is that all good? Can you see that, Abs?
Yes, looks good on my side. You just want to go on to presenter mode?
Yeah, I am doing that right now. So for those who don't know who we are, very briefly, so we're one of Australia's largest energy providers, very large generation and retail customer base operating in the national electricity market. Retail customers are residential right through to the commercial and industrial, and as well as the next gen solutions. So for context, next gen was created about 6-7 years ago when we redid our corporate strategy. And the purpose of it is really to kind of focus on, as the name would allude to, the next generation of solutions. So really harnessing all the emerging technologies, and not just the technologies as well, as looking at what the emerging business models are and really changing that customer experience and moving away from being a retailer who sends a customer a bill every 3 months to actually kind of having a two-way customer relationship and delivering on their needs. And obviously with, the emergence of just seeing distributed energy resources and other different technologies come through, is how can we actually create a solution that customers will want. And the way in which we do that is we do it through partnering. So obviously there's a couple of ways you can do it: through partnering, acquisition, or equity investment. We are part of the CLP group, which is based in Hong Kong. So as our partner, as our parent company, they undertake investments for the group, whereas in Australia, our primary focus is around the partner side of things. We have done a few small equity investments in the past, but that's not our primary focus. So in terms of the way in which we operate, so we take the ideas through the product development path. The teams and the groups actually set up whereby people focus on each of the different stages. Each stage requires a different skill set. So that's the way, the reason we've had set it up in the way it is. So the ideation through to launch will all be in the next gen. Once we have the idea, we've launched the product, and it's at a size in which we can put it into the core business, we'll pass it across. Obviously, not all ideas or initiatives will go into the core business, but a lot of them will. And the way we do that is through using internal resources, as well as partnering up with Startup Bootcamp. So internally, we have an incubator where we can push ideas through. And for all the ideas, we set up agile teams, and those teams flex based on what stage we're at. They run out of the Next Gen group. However, we do leverage the resources from across the business to then create a cross-functional team. And last year we launched On by Energy Australia. So that's a test and learn platform. And the reason being that is we just found we're just getting too caught up in the core businesses in terms of the IT and just so many other processes we had to go through. And it was really impeding on our ability to move quickly and launch quickly. So we launched On by Energy Australia. So we've set that up. It's a completely different company, different IT systems, different billing systems, and different customer service as well. So a lot of the products coming out of the Next Gen group are now being put into the On platform. And as well, as I mentioned, we've worked with SBC since 2018 now. We started off with the Accelerator program. And so that's a 13-week program, and we're running that once a year. And we had various successes come out of that, and we learned a lot from that. However, we changed it up this year, and we've added what we're calling the POP program. So what we found through running the Accelerator program is there were some startups where the Accelerator program didn't suit them, and that's for a variety of reasons, whether it be in terms of the stage of where they're at and also the timing, because startups are resource constrained, whether it be financial or human resources. So we've set up the POP program, and so we're currently actually kicked off this week, which is really exciting for us. And then we'll have the Accelerator program run after that. So we're really focusing on startups whereby they've already commercialized their product overseas or even in Australia, and they're looking to move into a new geography or into a new industry. So this is a more light touch program compared to our Accelerator program. And it also, as a business, allows us to kind of have continuous deal flow, which is great for momentum as well as allocating resources. And we're also a member of the EnergyTech Hub. And as Ab said, that kicked off last year, and we're really excited to be a partner again this year. So in terms of the benefits we'll get out of this, and I think some of the things I'm saying, I'm really echoing what Jodie had said in the previous conversation. So the reason we do this is around competitive advantage. Obviously, you know, we are working in an industry where it is actually a homogenous product. You can differentiate on service, but at the end of the day, really with the energy transition and the disruptions really opened it up. And so we're really looking for ways in which we can offer services to our company that can differentiate ourselves from our competitors. The market intelligence. So as Trev said, when they do these programs, they're doing global scouting, and we're able to see all the different new startups cropping up, seeing what trends are dropping away, what trends are picking up, and just talking to a lot of people overseas and hearing about what's happening. So we pick up a lot of intelligence through that program, as well as the insights that SBC bring as a company that's just so experienced in working with startups. Professional development as well. So with these programs, we give our people opportunities to get involved. And so Next Gen Alerts focus around the innovation side. We like to get others involved. So we offer the opportunity to be mentors to the startups throughout the program. We also get the business owners from the actual core business. So we work out where the product will eventually go and get them to sponsor it from the day dot. And it's really good for them to actually understand how startups work, the imperative for speed as well. And so we get them to work alongside the startups through these programs. So for them as well, it's a great opportunity to actually understand innovation, how it really works. And it really alludes to the cultural change. So again, as Jerry said, moving away from the procurement side, the legal side is actually understanding that the processes and the policies that applied previously don't need to apply to the startups, and actually getting people to change their mindset and more think about things in a startup rather than dedicating huge amounts of time and resources into these projects. And the other thing as well is supporting the brand. So for us, we're looking at the clean energy transition, but it's also promoted our brand overseas. So during some of these trips where we've gone abroad to speak to the startups, some of them turn up because they want to get exposure and meet an Australian energy company. So just on the end there, so it's probably some of the key lessons we've learned along the way. So we've made a lot of mistakes. It's been a lot of heartache to get to the point where we are, and we still have probably a long way to go. But yeah, number one, speed is absolutely critical, and really kind of getting the business to understand that. And so, you know, startups have finite resources, you know, and if they don't meet at speed, they will die. As harsh as that sounds, but, you know, you need to engage and start moving at the pace. You know, they always say corporates are oil tankers and startups are speedboats. So kind of getting to move really quickly. And that's the thing around creating separate processes. So we've gone about changing the way we do some of the legal documents, again, finance. We've set up a separate innovation fund. So every time we need to get money to go spend on an initiative, we don't have to go through the standard process of investment committee. We have a pool of funds that we can source. We do that through, we create concept canvases. And once you take the concept canvas up to the Next Gen team, asking for some funds, and that process works a whole lot quicker than the way you seek funds in the core business. Managing engagement in the core business is super important because at the end of the day, the majority of these initiatives they're going to own. So it's really important to get them on board from the beginning. You know, you need your assistance in understanding their business unit, getting access to the customers and getting them to shape it. And so they're going to be the biggest support mechanism to the startup in the long run. And last but not least, as I always say, innovation, be prepared to fail. I think we're so risk averse, and particularly in energy, you're always looking, you know, you want those guarantees. And I think you just need to accept that something's going to fail. And if you're going to do it, just do it quickly, pull the pin. I say, even with the startups coming through the accelerator program, some of them were killed off. And it's not a bad thing. It just, you know, for everyone's benefit, it wasn't going to actually get to a commercial point. And the key thing out of all of that is learning from your failures and adapting. And so we've definitely learned a lot along the way and have changed our processes and approach. But yeah, if you don't learn from your failures, you really have failed. Thank you, Art.
Thanks, Karen. I'm just trying to switch on my video. But we do have a a few questions coming in as well. So really great presentation. Really agree on the speed, the processes, managing engagement, preparing to fail. Really great insights. I've got a few questions kind of lined up as well. So you've, as EA, you've worked with a number of innovation partners. What do you actually look for when you are engaging with an innovation partner?
Yeah, so there's a few things we look for. So in terms of well, first and foremost, we come up with our focus areas. And so provided that's where like they need to fit to the focus areas. Otherwise for us, it's not really an engagement that's going to go anywhere. Secondly, that we're looking for anyone earliest in an MVP. So we take a range of startups that we work with. But yeah, so that's kind of the earliest we'll look at, and then kind of progressing from there. And the key thing is team. Quite often, as I said, you'll pick a great team over an average solution rather than a great solution over an average team. We've taken startups in and got them to pivot. And so even though we liked the solution initially, it didn't actually meet what we were looking for. And so we worked with them to then co-develop a product. So that's the thing, if you've got a great team, you can really do anything with them.
Beautiful. We've got a couple of questions from the audience as well. So
Yep.
One question came in. So if a utility wants to get involved in accelerator programs, how would an organization go about this?
Well, I would highly recommend Startup Book. Okay, so for our journey, I'll take a step back, so we kind of reached out to several accelerator, and so Startup Bootcamp was obviously the one that we did choose, but we kind of looked at their experience, obviously kind of cost, what they've done in the energy space. And for us, probably the key, one of the key drivers was around having something based in Australia. And the reason being, that's why I alluded to, is we really wanted to get the business involved and get them on board and get them in there working with the startups, mentoring them, being the owners. And we found that we had to have it based in Melbourne for that reason. And, we're aligned with where Startup Bootcamp was. So, yeah, kind of we got to the point where both parties were really looking at the same thing. So.
And one question from Khalid Dihesh. He asks, what does it mean to create separate processes?
So for so if you're looking for funding, so we have, for example, an investment committee. So if you want to spend money on a project, you then have to fill in the template, wait until the investment committee meet, which I think is every 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and you've got to get a slot on that. So it's quite a long, arduous process to get through. And the thing is, at the end of the day, like, people need to remember the amount of money that we're asking for when it comes to doing a pilot and trial is just really a rounding error to the spending in the core business. So you really have to balance up, like, how much money you're asking for to what is it that you're actually trying to do. And it's because for us, speed's imperative, so we don't want to be wasting a whole lot of time just to get something up and running. And again, like, so we did do an investment, and we had to go through the whole investment process. And, the investment process is focused around buying $1 billion power plant. And here we are talking about, some spare change to invest in a startup. So it's about actually your effort, reflecting what the activity is that you're doing. And the biggest thing as well is risk. And I think a big thing when you speak to, say, procurement, or you speak to legal, and you really kind of say to them, like, what is the most, we can lose? What is the risk to us as a business? So understanding that, you don't want to give them, a 100-page legal document. Like, it's, generally accelerators are a few people, unlikely to end up in court over it. They don't have the deep pockets to be suing you. So, and really the nature of the activities, doing a pilot or something like that. So again, it's really getting them to kind of weigh up the risk to understand what it is that you are doing, and not kind of apply a blanket view to it.
Yeah, so yeah, that's like great advice. I think you mentioned like the liner and the speedboat. I think there's another analogy where there's like the corpus a slow moving cog and the startups a smaller, faster moving cog, and how do you integrate those two those two together, and sometimes that integration part with a more streamlined terms and conditions or more streamlined investment decision-making process really helps kind of speed things up and kind of get to that validation point, which is what both parties are kind of looking for. Just a few quick follow-up questions. In terms of EA's future, what does that look like in terms of the future for EA and its work with startups?
So startups will always be a huge part of us. You know, at the end of the day, our core business is we have a bunch of customers and we build them. If you really break it down to what we are, and in anything you do, you kind of have your classic strategy approach. You can build something, you can buy something, you can partner. And so the lens we approach is, as I said, there's all these great emerging business out there that have these great ideas. So the best thing we can do is harness that, and we do that through the partnerships. So for us, startups will always be a huge part of what we're doing. And, you know, that's part of the reason we've expanded the program beyond the accelerator program, because we want to continue to work with those startups. And just to say as well, we do a lot of other activities outside of the accelerator and the POP program. So we have several teams within the Next Gen group. So we do, you know, identify opportunities and run other projects outside of this as well. It's not 100% through the accelerator, but at the end of the day, in everything we do, it is all through identifying and working with startups.
Beautiful. I just want to welcome Mike up on screen as well. Once he starts spinning his camera on and microphone on. This one final question for you, Karen. What gets you excited about working with startups?
A lot of things actually. I think for me, like working with them and just their mindset and just the way in which they see the future and the way that things can change. You know, it gets you really excited. And I think, you know, all of my colleagues will say, if I go away to a conference or I go work with any of, you know, doing the fast tracks or anything like this, they come back and they just say the energy you have. And it's just really exciting. So there's a lot happening. And I said, you know, there's so like endless possibilities out there. So kind of that's what gets me excited.
Beautiful, excellent. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
And next up, we've got Mike. So we've heard from the corporation side. Now we're going to hear from the startup perspective as well. So welcome, Mike. If you want to start sharing your presentation as well, and then we'll kick off.
G'day, Abs, and thank you. Thank you very much. So, look, I just wanted to talk about the impact of startups and working with startups, obviously. A very quick introduction of myself. I've been on both sides of the fence. I've been a senior manager in large corporates, including the innovation manager at large corporates, and now I'm working inside a startup. So I've sort of been on both sides of it, as I say. Very quickly, Lex has been associated with Startup Boot Camp since 2018. So for a startup point of view, we go back a long way. And in fact, we did our very first accelerated startup boot camp. Look, I've got a statistic sorry, not so much a statistic as a scenario. It's now predicted that by the end of this century, so 79 years from now, technology will advance another 10,000 years from where we are. So it's not unrealistic to imagine that our grandkids will look back on us with our iPhones and our iPads and our PlayStations, very much the way we look back on cavemen with stone axes. So when you're talking about startups and agility and technology and innovation, keep that in mind, because, you know, tomorrow, from a technology point of view, is a very, very different place than today. And so to the corporates that are in the audience, I've got a question for you, and that is, do you even have an innovation team? And I know a lot of businesses do, but some people mean it, and some people think that by having the team, they've ticked that box, and that's not necessarily true. And if you have got a team, I would ask the question, you know, do they have the capability to actually discover everything themselves? Do you expect them to find everything themselves? Or is it more a case of they're empowered to be curators of all the stuff that's out there, and it's up to them to work out what's worthwhile? So why do big corporates hesitate? And obviously the people we're talking to today don't. People wouldn't be a part of this if they did. But why do big corporate companies hesitate when it comes to startups? I'll give you an example of where I've seen that in action. So there's a very large national Australian company that needed a new specialist shed. This is a very specific type of shed, big, expensive, not many people can build them. But there happened to be a private company in Brisbane that was considered some of the world's best at this. But they're only a small company, a bit more than a mum and dad business, of course, but predominantly a mum and dad business. But they, as I say, they were considered the best in the world at building these sheds. And they were the cheapest because their overheads were low. Turned out the big company didn't want to deal with them. Quote, their balance sheet was too small. And so they took what was clearly an inferior product and paid more money for it. Now, I can't comment about whether that was a good decision or not, but what I can say is it's quite indicative of the type of thought processes that go into it. And it's really easy to see that big corporate companies will gravitate to other big corporates. It's a human nature. We all hang around people that remind us of ourselves. We do business with people that remind us of ourselves. And so companies will gravitate to other companies. And sometimes it comes across as it's just too much work to deal with the little guys, but that's not necessarily the truth. The other thing is, and I've seen this in action, is no one wants to be the person that sticks their neck out and gets their head cut off. It can be perceived as a personal risk to engage with the little guys. And there is that worry about the balance sheet. It's not an unreasonable thing to want to be sure that the person or the company you're dealing with, the startup that you're dealing with, will still be there next month, next year, and hopefully next decade. So why should corporates engage? Well, startups tend to be at the bleeding edge, and we've heard it from a couple of other speakers already that they're much more agile, they're much faster, and so they are right out there at the front. Where a startup can be out at the front, the big corporates can't. But what we find is that if big businesses only deal with other big businesses, then I'm here to say that it is my opinion, and I'm not alone on this, that those big businesses will kind of go the way of the dinosaur together. Big businesses need to be out there on the cutting edge. Remember that prediction. By the end of this century, another 10,000 years. So by dealing with the startups, you can actually negate that longevity issue, because if you deal with a startup, you're giving them the strength to continue to do business, and together you can both grow stronger. It is the proverbial win-win, normally, assuming you've done some due diligence. It's also an opportunity for the big business to take itself right out to the bleeding edge with actually not much risk. And Karen pointed out a minute ago that you get to be out there. You're not taking that huge risk. In fact, you kind of need the lawyers to understand this isn't the big risk that it would be if we're implementing a multi-million-dollar system. This is just a great chance to kick the stones over and see what's under there. Have a bit of a look, and everyone's happy at the other end. If it's a winner, you beauty. If it's not, well, we tried. And that's the big thing, isn't it? It's around trying. And obviously, if a big business engages with a startup nice and early, they're likely to be ahead of their competitors. So what can go wrong for the startup themselves? Well, it's very hard for a startup to know how to get in. I mean, where is the doorway into a big corporate business? Do you literally walk up to the receptionist? One would argue not, but I guess sometimes that might be the only way. There are tools out there that they're like LinkedIn that are helping, but even me, people are sick of people contacting them in LinkedIn saying, hey, I've got this great idea and I want to sell you something. But the reality is that almost every business has got what we would call these days intrapreneurs. And those are the people that have got that unique skill set. It's natural. It's probably not something you've been teaching yet. That they recognize problems and they know there must be solutions, and they are looking for them, whether to develop those solutions themselves or whether to find them. And those are the people that will probably be reaching out to startups. They'll have been searching on the internet for stuff, and they'll have come across stuff, and they'll be unofficially reaching out to startups, and they know what's out there. And so it's up to them to be able to get traction. And often those entrepreneurs will engage the startups with the best of intentions. They really mean it when they're talking to the startup, but even they'll face gatekeepers in the business, especially if the business has those gatekeepers that have that old ingrained corporate view around we'll only deal with the big guys. And so, you know, even those people can get frustrated. So what can the big corporates do to make it better? Well, have a program that supports your entrepreneurs. This is over and above, by the way, if you were to have your own accelerator program. But even if you're not there, just have a program that supports your own people internally. Make sure you've got somewhere for those people's ideas to go and to be considered, but considered without bias or judgment, right? Just because they're supposing or proposing that they could deal with a startup doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Make that system agile, make it fast, because if you sit on something for 12 months or it takes you 12 months to even think about it, it's gone. It's old news. Someone else has already done it, so there's no sense doing it. And make sure to remember to look at that big picture. Forget about the startup or the fact that it's a startup. And ask these questions. Does the product or service have merit? Right? Does it add value? Is it right out there? Right? Is this really right out there? Almost so far out there that it's the proverbial too good to be true. Right? Is it too good to be true? Is there a return on investment? If you can say yes to those things, then what are you waiting for? You know, again, there's almost no risk. You might make a startup successful or not, but in the meantime, you might have solved a problem that you couldn't find a way to solve any other way. And so very quickly, I just wanted to talk about an experience that Lex has had. So Lex was involved in an accelerator with EDP Renewables in North America. It was a week-long workshop, so it wasn't just a 5-minute pitch somewhere. It was a week-long workshop, and the final pitch was held at Lisbon. Lex was chosen for a 12-week pilot, and that pilot was incredibly successful. So now, you know, Lex is in the process of doing a proper implementation, but there's some real lessons learned by Lex in amongst this. And the big thing was that the big business, EDP, made sure that the people they needed to talk to were available. Those people became part of the project and they're available. Don't say it's just a little business. They only need to deal with our lower managers or even our middle managers. It's an important project. You need to deal with the startup as if it was anyone else. And so on that note, I'll ask, do we have any questions?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, there's a few questions that's come up. We have a really interesting presentation, and yeah, really great work with EDP. Do you want to talk a bit about that project that you did and what the outcome of that was, and why was that really successful?
Sure. Let me go back to that slide so it can be on the screen. I think I know how to do that. So the outcome was, as I say, it was a pilot. It was a 12-week pilot, and it was run as a very inclusive project. So one of our team members, George Matthews, he's very much into human-centered design. And so he designed the project around really engaging with the end users and the managers that were involved. And so that made a world of difference because the decision makers, the key stakeholders, everyone from the guy swinging the spanner to the guy whose neck was on the line if it all went pear-shaped, were all in the meeting. And it was so successful that, in fact, that particular team now introduces Lex to a broader part of EDP around the world. Lex is now talking to EDP Generation in Spain, and the EDP Renewables team in Illinois are looking to roll the Lex product out across the entire platform. So again, very little risk to EDP. You know, a few bucks across the line, which to them was kind of like throwing some money over the bar for a few beers. But it made the world of difference to Lex. It meant that they genuinely wanted to engage, and therefore Lex was genuinely engaging back. And it's that level of engagement, it's that partnership that makes all the difference.
Excellent advice and insights. I'm just we've got a couple of minutes left, so I just want to ask you quite quickly, what's the biggest lesson that that you've learned? Because Lex has done a bunch of collaboration projects with with large energy utilities around the world. What's that biggest lesson that's kind of come out, and what advice would you give to startups who are looking at collaborating with the large corporates?
Yeah, look, the first bit is, and this was alluded to earlier as well, but and this goes to both the startup and the corporates. Make sure you understand what problem it is you're trying to solve. Don't have technology looking for a problem, right? Have a problem that needs a solution, and that potentially this startup has something that will help solve the problem. You know, I personally have a saying that says innovation is around psychology. It's not around technology. Technology, it will always be the foundation. It's your people and your processes and your systems that will actually give you the solution. So understand what it is you're trying to solve. Don't necessarily go to the startup and say, we've got a problem, do you know how to solve it? Try and match it a little earlier, but certainly don't expect the startup to know what the problem is, and vice versa from the startup's point of view. Don't go into a big company and tell them you know all about what their business is and what their problems are. That would be profoundly rude and arrogant and ridiculous, actually. So try and get together and solve or work out what the problem is you might want to solve. It's not unreasonable for a corporate to say, I'm really interested in your technology. We've been watching you and that technology for a while. We'd like to see where it might fit. Let's brainstorm what problems might work. But don't expect the startup to know what the problem will be, and vice versa. Don't go to, if you're a startup, don't go to a corporate and tell them what the problem is. And the other thing from a startup's point of view is try and find out who the decision makers are, and try, without being rude, to get to talk to them. There's, you know, the middle managers with the best of intentions, just they get stalled just like you do. So make sure you're talking to the right people, and don't get frustrated.
Great advice, Mike. I think we can't agree more on that in terms of like having that value proposition. What's the problem they're trying to solve? Hugely important. So thank you, Mike, for your insights, and thank you to Jody, Karen, and Trevor as well. And we also like to thank Charlotte and the team at Digital Utilities for hosting us. To learn a bit more about the EnergyTech Hub, please visit our website at theenergytechhub.com.au. Expressions of interest for scale-ups to join the 2021 EnergyTech Hub will open on the 3rd of May. If you're an organization who is interested in what the EnergyTech Hub is doing, then please reach out. We'd love to have a chat and talk about how we can get involved. Thank you all for your time and attention, and we'll see you very soon.
Thanks so much to all of our speakers in that session. There were some really great insights there for utilities on how working with startups can benefit their businesses.